Telephone lines can be a source of shock hazards. While telephone lines operate at relatively low voltages compared to power lines under certain conditions, they can still deliver dangerous electrical shock. The voltage present on a telephone line is typically around 48 volts direct current when the phone is not in use, and this voltage increases when the phone is in use, such as when ringing. The ringing voltage can be significantly higher, often around 90 volts alternating current. While 48 volts direct current might not be immediately dangerous to most people, 90 volts alternating current can pose a risk, especially if a person has pre-existing health conditions or if the contact occurs under wet conditions. Several factors can contribute to a telephone line becoming a shock hazard. Firstly, induced voltage from nearby power lines can energize telephone lines. If a telephone line runs parallel to a high-voltage power line, electromagnetic induction can cause a voltage to be induced in the telephone line. This induced voltage can be high enough to cause a shock. Secondly, lightning strikes can cause a surge of electricity in telephone lines. Lightning can travel through telephone lines and equipment, posing a significant shock hazard to anyone in contact with the line. Telephone companies typically employ surge protectors to mitigate this risk, but these protectors are not foolproof. Thirdly, faulty equipment or wiring within the telephone network can also cause a shock hazard. If there is a short circuit or insulation failure in the telephone equipment, it can energize the telephone line with a higher than normal voltage. Fourthly, water ingress can exacerbate the risk of electric shock from telephone lines. Water is a good conductor of electricity, so if a telephone line or equipment becomes wet, it can increase the risk of electric shock. This is particularly dangerous in outdoor environments where telephone lines may be exposed to rain or moisture. Fifthly, improper grounding can lead to shock hazards. Telephone systems are typically grounded to provide a safe path for fault currents. However, if the grounding is inadequate or improperly installed, it can increase the risk of electric shock. To mitigate the risk of shock hazards from telephone lines, several safety measures should be taken. Firstly, avoid contact with telephone lines during thunderstorms. Lightning strikes can cause a surge of electricity in telephone lines, so it is best to avoid using telephones or being near telephone lines during thunderstorms. Secondly, use insulated tools when working with telephone wiring. Insulated tools can help to protect you from electric shock if you accidentally come into contact with a live wire. Thirdly, ensure that telephone equipment is properly grounded. Proper grounding provides a safe path for fault currents and can help to prevent electric shock. Fourthly, inspect telephone wiring and equipment for damage. Damaged wiring or equipment can pose a shock hazard, so it is important to inspect it regularly and repair any damage promptly. Fifthly, be aware of the location of nearby power lines. Avoid running telephone lines parallel to power lines, as this can increase the risk of induced voltage. Sixthly, use surge protectors to protect telephone equipment from lightning strikes and other surges. Surge protectors can help to divert excess electricity away from the equipment and prevent damage. Seventhly, consider using a cordless phone. Cordless phones offer a degree of isolation from the telephone line, which can reduce the risk of electric shock. Eighthly, if you experience any tingling or shock when touching a telephone line or equipment, immediately disconnect the equipment and contact a qualified technician. This could be a sign of a serious electrical problem. Ninthly, never attempt to repair telephone wiring or equipment yourself unless you are a qualified technician. Telephone wiring and equipment can be complex and dangerous, so it is best to leave repairs to the professionals. Tenthly, follow all local electrical codes and regulations when installing or maintaining telephone wiring and equipment. These codes and regulations are designed to protect people from electrical hazards. In summary, while telephone lines typically operate at low voltages, they can still pose a shock hazard under certain conditions. By taking appropriate safety measures, you can reduce the risk of electric shock from telephone lines. It is important to be aware of the potential hazards and to take steps to protect yourself and others. Furthermore, it's crucial to understand the difference between the potential hazards of traditional landlines and modern voice over Internet Protocol or VoIP systems. Traditional landlines, as described earlier, have a direct physical connection to the telephone company's network and can carry both direct current and alternating current voltages. These voltages are necessary for powering the phone and signaling, like ringing. VoIP systems, on the other hand, typically rely on an internet connection and a separate power source. The phone itself plugs into a router or modem, which then connects to the internet. The voltage levels involved in VoIP systems are generally lower and are usually supplied by a low-voltage power adapter. However, even with VoIP systems, there are still potential electrical hazards to be aware of. Firstly, the power adapter itself can be a source of shock if it is damaged or improperly wired. Secondly, the network cables connecting the phone to the router or modem can also carry low-voltage electricity, which could pose a risk if the cables are damaged or exposed to moisture. Thirdly, if the VoIP system is connected to a backup power supply, such as a UPS, during a power outage, the system will continue to operate, but the risk of electrical shock may still be present if there are any faults in the wiring or equipment. Fourthly, it's important to ensure that all VoIP equipment is properly grounded to prevent electrical shock. Fifthly, when installing or maintaining VoIP systems, it's crucial to follow all safety guidelines and regulations. Sixthly, if you're not comfortable working with electrical wiring or equipment, it's best to hire a qualified technician to handle the installation or repairs. Seventhly, consider the environmental factors. Damp or wet conditions significantly increase the risk of electrical shock. Ensure that all telephone and VoIP equipment is kept dry and protected from moisture. Eighthly, never use electrical devices near water, and always dry your hands thoroughly before handling any electrical equipment. Ninthly, regular inspections of telephone and VoIP equipment can help identify potential hazards before they cause problems. Look for frayed wires, cracked casings, and other signs of damage. Tenthly, always disconnect the power supply before working on any electrical equipment. This simple step can prevent accidental electrical shock. In addition to these general safety measures, there are also some specific precautions that should be taken when working with telephone lines and VoIP systems. Firstly, always use a telephone line tester to check for voltage before working on any telephone wiring. This will help you to avoid accidental electrical shock. Secondly, never work on telephone wiring while standing on a wet surface. This can increase your risk of electrical shock. Thirdly, if you're working on telephone wiring outdoors, be aware of the weather conditions. Avoid working during thunderstorms or when the ground is wet. Fourthly, always wear appropriate personal protective equipment, such as insulated gloves and safety glasses, when working on telephone wiring. Fifthly, if you're not sure how to safely work on telephone wiring, it's best to call a qualified technician for assistance. Sixthly, be mindful of the location of other utilities, such as gas lines and water pipes, when working on telephone wiring. Damage to these utilities can be dangerous and costly. Seventhly, always follow the manufacturer's instructions when installing or maintaining telephone equipment. Eighthly, if you have any questions about the safety of telephone wiring or VoIP systems, contact a qualified electrician or telephone technician for assistance. Ninthly, remember that electrical safety is everyone's responsibility. By following these safety guidelines, you can help to prevent electrical shock and other accidents. Tenthly, knowledge is power. The more you understand about electrical hazards, the better equipped you'll be to protect yourself and others. Consider taking an electrical safety course to learn more about electrical hazards and how to prevent them.